They say that the bond between twins is unlike any other. For Eleanor and Elizabeth Blackwood, that bond was twisted into something unrecognizable, something that would haunt Eleanor for the rest of her life. The Blackwood twins were born in the autumn of 1975 in the small town of Ravenwood, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. From the outside, they appeared identical in every way, matching copper hair, eyes the color of amber, and the same delicate features that made them the darlings of their community. But those who knew them well understood that beneath the surface, the sisters couldn't have been more different. Eleanor was gentle and introspective, often found with her nose buried in a book or wandering the woods behind their Victorian home, collecting leaves and sketching the wildlife. Elizabeth, however, possessed a charisma that drew people to her like moths to a flame. She was outgoing and confident, always at the center of attention. And yet, there was something in her smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a coldness that occasionally flickered across her face when she thought no one was watching. Their parents, Margaret and Thomas Blackwood, were prominent figures in Ravenwood. Thomas was the town's most respected doctor, while Margaret managed the local library. They were loving but distracted parents, often consumed by their demanding careers and community responsibilities. Perhaps this is why they failed to notice the subtle changes in their daughter's relationship as the twins approached adolescence. It began innocently enough, as most sinister things do. In the summer of 1985, when the twins were 10 years old, Elizabeth suggested a new game. "It's called Whispers in the Dark," Elizabeth explained, her eyes gleaming with excitement as she sat cross-legged on Eleanor's bed one night after their parents had gone to sleep. "I'll tell you a secret, and if you tell anyone, something bad will happen." Eleanor, always eager to please her more dominant sister, nodded enthusiastically. "What's the secret?" Elizabeth leaned forward, her breath warm against Eleanor's ear. "I took Mom's silver locket and hid it in the hollow tree by the creek." Eleanor gasped. Their mother had been searching for that locket for days, growing increasingly distressed as it had been a gift from their grandmother before she passed. "But Lizzie, we have to give it back. Mom's so upset." Elizabeth's hand clamped over Eleanor's mouth, her fingers digging painfully into her sister's cheeks. "That's not how the game works, Ellie. You can't tell." "If you do," she trailed off, her expression darkening. "Well, just remember I always know when you're lying." The next morning, when their mother mentioned the missing locket at breakfast, Eleanor felt Elizabeth's eyes boring into her. She stirred her cereal in silence, stomach churning with anxiety. Later that day, when Eleanor returned to her room, she found her favorite stuffed rabbit, a worn velvet thing she'd had since infancy, with its head torn off, stuffing spilling onto her pillow like end rails. Pinned to it was a note in Elizabeth's neat handwriting. "I told you there would be consequences." It was the first lesson in what would become years of psychological torment. Elizabeth's games evolved, becoming more elaborate and cruel. There was hide and don't seek, where Elizabeth would lock Eleanor in the old root cellar beneath their house for hours, sometimes overnight, telling their parents that Eleanor was staying at a friend's house. The damp, pitch-black space was home to spiders and the occasional rat, and Eleanor would huddle in the corner, knees drawn to her chest, trying to control her breathing as panic threatened to overwhelm her. Then there was Mirror Mirror, a game where Elizabeth would mimic Eleanor's every move at school, then spread rumors about things Eleanor had supposedly done or said. When Eleanor would deny these actions, Elizabeth would have already convinced their classmates of the truth, making Eleanor appear mentally unstable. By the time the twins were 13 in 1988, Eleanor had developed severe anxiety and insomnia. She jumped at the slightest sounds and had difficulty maintaining friendships as Elizabeth would inevitably sabotage them. Their parents attributed Eleanor's deteriorating mental health to the natural stresses of adolescence, never suspecting that the true source of her anguish slept in the bedroom across the hall. "You know why I do this, don't you, Ellie?" Elizabeth whispered one night, having crept into Eleanor's room and perched at the foot of her bed like a gargoyle. "It's because you're the weak one. You were supposed to die in the womb. That's what happens to the weaker twins sometimes. But you clung on, stole half of what should have been mine, so now I'm just taking it back bit by bit." Eleanor would later recall this as the moment she realized that her sister wasn't simply playing cruel games. Elizabeth genuinely believed she was entitled to Eleanor's suffering, as if it were some cosmic balancing of accounts. The summer of 1989 marked a turning point in the twins' dark relationship. Their parents, concerned about Eleanor's increasing withdrawal and Elizabeth's intense focus on academic achievements, decided that some time away from Ravenwood might benefit the family. They rented a cabin on Lake Serenity, a remote spot about 3 hours from town, planning to spend 2 weeks swimming, hiking, and reconnecting as a family. For the first few days, Eleanor felt a sense of relief being away from the familiar settings of Elizabeth's torment. The cabin was small but cozy, with 2 bedrooms, one for their parents and one that the twins shared. The surrounding woods were dense and peaceful, and the lake's waters were clear and cool against the summer heat. On the 4th night, Thomas and Margaret attended a dinner with old friends who owned a cabin on the other side of the lake, leaving the twins alone with strict instructions to lock the doors and go to bed at a reasonable hour. As soon as their parents' car disappeared down the gravel road, Elizabeth turned to Eleanor with a smile that made her blood run cold. "I've been thinking of a new game," Elizabeth said, twirling a strand of her copper hair around her finger. "It's called Buried Secrets." Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. "I don't want to play any more games, Lizzie." Elizabeth's smile didn't falter. "Oh, but this one's special. I promise you'll never forget it." Before Eleanor could protest further, Elizabeth produced a small vial filled with clear liquid. "This is something I borrowed from Dad's medical bag. It's a sedative. It won't hurt you. Just make you sleep for a little while." "No," Eleanor said, backing away. "I'm going to call Mom and Dad." Elizabeth sighed as if disappointed by her sister's predictable response. "If you do that, I'll tell them about the cigarettes I found in your backpack." Eleanor's eyes widened. "But those aren't mine. You planted those. And who do you think they'll believe? The perfect daughter or the one who's been acting out for years?" Elizabeth's voice was calm, reasonable. "Just take the sedative, Ellie. It'll be easier that way." Trapped by her sisters' manipulation and years of conditioned compliance, Eleanor reluctantly accepted the vial. The liquid tasted bitter, and within minutes, her limbs grew heavy, her thoughts cloudy. The last thing she remembered before losing consciousness was Elizabeth's face hovering above her, those amber eyes studying her with clinical detachment. When Eleanor awoke, she was surrounded by darkness and the smell of damp earth. Panic surged through her as she realized she couldn't move her arms or legs. They were bound with what felt like rough rope. She was lying on her back on the cold ground. And when she tried to scream, she discovered her mouth was covered with duct tape. A beam of light suddenly cut through the darkness, and Elizabeth's face appeared above her, illuminated by a flashlight. "Good, you're awake," Elizabeth said, her voice eerily cheerful. Welcome to your grave, Ellie. Eleanor's muffled screams barely registered as her sister explained the game. I've buried you in a shallow grave in the woods behind the cabin, Elizabeth said, gesturing to the earth and walls surrounding Eleanor. Don't worry. I've left your face uncovered so you can breathe, and I've left this little walkie-talkie with you. She placed a small black device next to Eleanor's head. If you want to be unburied, you'll have to answer some questions. For each correct answer, I'll remove 1 scoop of dirt. For each wrong answer, I'll add 1. Simple, right? Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as Elizabeth began her macabre quiz, asking increasingly personal and humiliating questions about Eleanor's private thoughts, crushes, and fears. Things Elizabeth had no way of knowing, unless she'd been reading Eleanor's diary. Hours passed as the game continued, with Elizabeth occasionally leaving for long periods, during which Eleanor lay in the dark, certain she would die alone in the woods. The summer night brought a sudden downpour, and water began to seep into the shallow grave, rising around Eleanor's body. In her terror, she managed to work one hand free from its bindings, then the other, clawing desperately at the mud walls of her prison. By the time Elizabeth returned at dawn, Eleanor had freed herself and was huddled at the base of a nearby tree, soaked, covered in mud, and shivering violently. Instead of anger at her escape, Elizabeth looked impressed. You're stronger than I thought, she said, helping Eleanor to her feet as if they just shared a mildly amusing adventure rather than a night of psychological torture. Come on, we need to get you cleaned up before Mom and Dad get back. The rest of the vacation passed in a fog for Eleanor. She didn't tell her parents what had happened, partly out of fear of Elizabeth's retaliation, partly because she knew how outlandish it would sound. Who would believe that her perfect twin sister had drugged her and buried her alive as part of a game? When they returned to Ravenwood, Eleanor withdrew further into herself. She began sleeping with a chair propped against her bedroom door and carrying a small pocket knife everywhere she went. Her grades plummeted and she developed a stutter when speaking to authority figures. Meanwhile, Elizabeth flourished, joining multiple extracurricular activities and being nominated for the prestigious Ravenwood Scholarship for Exceptional Students. The winter of 1990 brought another shift in the twins' twisted dynamic. A new girl named Cassandra Moore moved to Ravenwood and was seated next to Eleanor in several classes. Quiet and artistic like Eleanor, Cassandra seemed unfazed by the rumors that had isolated Eleanor from her peers. They bonded over their shared love of drawing and classic literature, and for the first time in years, Eleanor felt a genuine connection with someone other than her tormentor. Elizabeth predictably didn't approve of this new friendship. She tried her usual tactics, spreading rumors about Cassandra, attempting to befriend her to drive a wedge between the two. But Cassandra proved remarkably resilient to Elizabeth's manipulations. There's something not right about your sister, Cassandra confided to Eleanor one afternoon as they sat by the creek behind the school, sketching the winter landscape. The way she looks at you. Sometimes, it's not normal. Eleanor, so accustomed to keeping Elizabeth's cruelty a secret, found herself hesitating on the precipice of revelation. She plays these games. She finally whispered, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. Cassandra put down her sketchbook. What kind of games? And so for the first time, Eleanor began to tell someone about the years of torment she had endured. She spoke haltingly at first, then with increasing urgency, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. She told Cassandra about the psychological manipulation, the isolation, the incident at the lake cabin. As she spoke, She watched Cassandra's expression shift from confusion to horror to determination. "You need to tell someone, Ellie. Your parents, a teacher, the police, someone who can help." Elena shook her head vehemently. "You don't understand. No one would believe me. Elizabeth is she's perfect in everyone's eyes, and she'd find a way to make me pay for talking." Cassandra gripped Eleanor's hands. "Then we'll gather evidence. We'll make them believe." Over the next few weeks, Cassandra helped Eleanor document Elizabeth's behavior. They kept a detailed journal of incidents, recorded conversations when possible using Cassandra's Walkman, and took photographs of the cruel presence Elizabeth would leave in Eleanor's room: dead birds arranged in patterns, dolls with their eyes gouged out, pages torn from Eleanor's diary and defaced with disturbing drawings. Elizabeth, sensing a shift in power, escalated her torment. She began calling Eleanor in the middle of the night from the downstairs phone, breathing heavily. Before hanging up, she would rearrange items in Eleanor's room while she was at school, making Eleanor question her own memory and perception. And she started a new game called Poison Roulette, where she would tamper with Eleanor's food or drinks, sometimes adding nothing, sometimes adding laxatives or Epiac to make her violently ill. The spring of 1991 brought matters to a head. As their 16th birthday approached, Elizabeth's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would vacillate between ignoring Eleanor completely and following her obsessively, standing outside the bathroom door while Eleanor showered, watching her sleep from the doorway of her bedroom. One afternoon in April, Eleanor returned home from school to find Elizabeth sitting on her bed, surrounded by the evidence she and Cassandra had collected: the journal, the photographs, the recordings. "Did you really think this would work?" Elizabeth asked, her voice eerily calm, as she held up the journal. "Did you think anyone would choose your word over mine?" Eleanor stood frozen in the doorway, her escape route blocked by her twin. "How did you find those?" Elizabeth smiled. "Cassandra isn't as loyal as you thought. All it took was a few rumors about her family's financial troubles, and suddenly she was very cooperative." Eleanor's heart sank. "You're lying, am I? Call her. See if she answers." Elizabeth tossed Eleanor's cordless phone to her. "Go ahead." With trembling fingers, Eleanor dialed Cassandra's number. It rang several times before Cassandra's mother answered, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "The Moore's residence. Mrs. Moore, it's Eleanor. Is Cassandra there?" A long pause. "Cassandra doesn't want to speak with you, Eleanor. Please don't call here again." The line went dead. Eleanor looked up to see Elizabeth watching her with undisguised triumph. "What did you do?" "I simply showed Cassandra who you really are," Elizabeth said, standing and moving toward Eleanor with predatory grace. The disturbed twin, the one who's been obsessively stalking her, taking photos of her without permission, recording her private conversations, the one who's been leaving dead animals in her locker because she rejected your inappropriate advances. Eleanor felt the room spinning around her. "That's not true." "None of that is true, but it looks true, doesn't it? Especially with your history of emotional problems." Elizabeth was close enough now that Eleanor could smell her familiar scent, vanilla, and something metallic, like copper. "And now, dear sister, it's time for our final game." Eleanor's survival instincts, honed by years of torment, finally kicked in. She lunged past Elizabeth, racing down the stairs and out the front door. She ran blindly through the streets of Ravenwood, her only thought to put as much distance between herself and her twin as possible. She ended up at the public library where her mother worked, bursting through the doors with such force that several patrons looked up in alarm. Margaret Blackwood emerged from behind the circulation desk, her face registering shock at her daughter's disheveled appearance. "Eleanor, what on earth?" "Mom?" Eleanor gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "I need to tell you something about Elizabeth." And there, in the quiet sanctuary of the library, Eleanor finally revealed the years of torment she had suffered at her twins' hands. She spoke for hours, her voice growing stronger as she recounted incident after incident, no longer caring if she was believed, only knowing that she couldn't keep the poison inside any longer. Margaret listened in stunned silence, her face growing paler with each revelation. When Eleanor finally fell quiet, exhausted by the unburdening, Margaret placed a trembling hand over her daughter's. "I need to call your father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And then the police. The next few months passed in a blur for Eleanor. There was a police investigation during which Elizabeth maintained her composure, portraying herself as the concerned sister of a deeply troubled girl. But as the evidence mounted, the testimony of classmates who had witnessed Elizabeth's odd behavior, medical records showing Eleanor's unexplained injuries and illnesses, and finally the discovery of Elizabeth's own journal, hidden in a hollowed-out copy of Wuthering Heights in her bookshelf, the truth became undeniable. Elizabeth's journal revealed a mind far more disturbed than anyone had imagined. In meticulous detail, she had documented every game she had played with Eleanor, along with plans for future torments that grew increasingly violent and potentially lethal. The final pages outlined what she called the ultimate game, a plan to drug Eleanor and stage her suicide, complete with a forged note detailing Eleanor's supposed obsession with Elizabeth and her jealousy over Elizabeth's perfect life. In July of 1991, Elizabeth was committed to Pinehurst Psychiatric Hospital for evaluation and treatment. The diagnosis was antisocial personality disorder with narcissistic traits and sadistic tendencies. The prognosis was poor. The doctors explained to the Blackwoods that their daughter's condition was likely untreatable, her capacity for empathy permanently compromised. For Eleanor, Elizabeth's institutionalization brought little immediate relief. The damage of years of psychological torture had left deep scars. She suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, trust issues, and a persistent fear that somehow Elizabeth would find a way to continue her games, even from behind Pinehurst's secure walls. The Blackwood family fractured under the weight of the revelations. Thomas, unable to reconcile his failure to protect one daughter from the other, retreated into his work, taking on additional shifts at the hospital to avoid the now oppressive atmosphere of their home. Margaret, consumed by guilt, became overprotective of Eleanor, monitoring her constantly as if to make up for years of inattention. In the fall of 1991, Eleanor made the decision to leave Ravenwood. With the support of her therapist, Dr. Harriet Chen, she applied to a boarding school in Vermont, Westfield Academy, known for its supportive environment and strong arts program. Her parents, recognizing her need for a fresh start away from the whispers and stares of their small town, reluctantly agreed. At Westfield, Eleanor began the slow process of rebuilding her sense of self. She threw herself into her art, using it as a way to process her trauma. Her drawings and paintings, once filled with shadowy figures and claustrophobic spaces, gradually evolved to include light and open landscapes. She made cautious friendships, learning to trust her own judgment again. It was at Westfield that Eleanor met James Harrington, an English teacher who recognized her literary talent and encouraged her to write about her experiences. Under his mentorship, Eleanor began keeping a new journal, not to document horrors, but to reclaim her narrative and make sense of her past. The thing about trauma, James told her one afternoon as they discussed her latest essay, is that it doesn't just change you, it reveals you. The strength you found to survive reveals something fundamental about who you are, Eleanor. Those words became a touchstone for Eleanor as she navigated her recovery. She wasn't just a victim of her twins' cruelty. She was a survivor who had found the courage to escape, to speak the truth, to begin again. In the spring of 1993, now 18 years old and preparing to graduate from Westfield, Eleanor received a letter from Pinehurst Psychiatric Hospital. Elizabeth had been granted limited correspondence privileges, and she had chosen to write to Eleanor. For days, the unopened envelope sat on Eleanor's desk, its presence a weight on her consciousness. When she finally gathered the courage to read it, the contents were both exactly what she expected and entirely surprising. Elizabeth made no apologies for her actions. Instead, she wrote of their time together as if recalling fond childhood memories. "Do you remember our games, Ellie?" the letter read. "I think of them often, especially buried secrets. The way you looked up at me from that shallow grave, your eyes so alive with fear. That was when I knew you were stronger than I gave you credit for. Perhaps that's why you survived, why you won. But games can always be replayed, can't they? And next time the rules might be different." Eleanor brought the letter to Dr. Chen during their weekly session. The psychiatrist read it with a furrowed brow before setting it aside. "This is a power play," Dr. Chen explained. "Elizabeth is trying to re-establish control over you from a distance. The threat is veiled but deliberate. Should I be worried?" Eleanor asked, her old fear stirring in her chest. "Elizabeth remains in a secure facility and her treatment team is aware of her history. But more importantly, you're not the same person she tormented. You have support, awareness, and strength she doesn't anticipate." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "I suggest you don't respond. Any engagement, even to defend yourself, gives her what she wants. Your attention, your fear." Eleanor took the advice to heart. She did not respond to Elizabeth's letter, nor to the 3 others that followed over the next year, each more desperate in tone than the last. Instead, she focused on her future, accepting a scholarship to study fine arts and psychology at a university on the West Coast, as far from Ravenwood and Pinehurst as she could manage. College brought new challenges and opportunities for growth. Eleanor developed a particular interest in trauma recovery and art therapy, recognizing how her own healing had been facilitated through creative expression. She joined a support group for survivors of abuse, where she shared her story for the first time with people who truly understood. It was in this group that she met Michael Reeves, a sociology major with his own history of familial trauma. Their connection was immediate and profound. 2 people who understood the complex process of rebuilding a life after betrayal by those who should have provided safety. "The hardest part for me," Eleanor confided to Michael one evening as they walked along the beach near campus, "is reconciling the 2 versions of Elizabeth in my mind. The sister I loved and the person who tortured me were the same person. Sometimes I catch myself remembering a good moment between us and then I feel guilty as if I'm betraying myself by not hating her completely." Michael squeezed her hand. "Trauma isn't linear and neither is healing. You're allowed to Hold both those truths, that you loved your sister and that she hurt you beyond forgiveness. By her senior year of college in 1997, Eleanor had not heard from Elizabeth in over 2 years. The silence was both a relief and a new kind of unease, like the calm before a storm. Then, a week before graduation, she received a call from her mother. "Elizabeth's gone," Margaret said, her voice tight with anxiety. She manipulated one of the orderlies at Pinehurst. Apparently, they've been having some kind of relationship. He helped her escape during his night shift. Eleanor felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. Have they found her? Do they know where she's headed? The police are looking, but Eleanor, they found maps of California in her room, your university, your apartment building. Margaret's voice broke. You need to be careful. She's had years to think about what happened. And the doctors say her obsession with you has only intensified. The following days were a blur of police interviews, security arrangements, and panic attacks that left Eleanor gasping for breath in the middle of the night. Campus security was alerted. Her roommates were informed of the potential danger, and a detective from the local police department checked in with her daily. Despite the threat hanging over her, Eleanor refused to miss her graduation ceremony. "I won't let her take this from me, too," she told Michael as they prepared for the commencement in their caps and gowns. "I've worked too hard to get here." The ceremony passed without incident, but Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as she crossed the stage to receive her diploma. That evening, as friends and family gathered at a local restaurant to celebrate, Eleanor excused herself to use the restroom. As she washed her hands, the door to the bathroom swung open, and in the mirror, she saw the face that was both achingly familiar and the stuff of nightmares. Elizabeth looked both the same and different, thinner, with shadows under her eyes that Eleanor didn't remember, but with the same copper hair and amber eyes that mirrored her own. She wore a waitress uniform complete with a name tag that read Sophie. "Hello, Ellie," Elizabeth said, her voice soft as she locked the bathroom door behind her. "Congratulations on graduating. First in your class. I always knew you had it in you." Eleanor turned slowly, forcing herself to breathe. "How did you find me?" Elizabeth smiled. "You're my twin. Did you really think I wouldn't be able to find you?" She took a step closer. "I've been watching you for weeks. Your little apartment with the blue curtains. Your morning runs along the beachfront. Your boyfriend with the sad eyes and the scar on his left hand." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. "What do you want, Elizabeth?" "I want to play one more game," Elizabeth said, reaching into the pocket of her uniform. "For old times' sake." Eleanor tensed, expecting a weapon, but Elizabeth withdrew a small, worn photograph. The twins at age 6. Arms around each other, grinning at the camera with identical gap-toothed smiles. "Do you remember this day?" Elizabeth asked, her voice taking on a dreamy quality. "It was our birthday. Dad took us to the carnival, and we rode the Ferris wheel 7 times in a row. You were so scared, but you didn't want to admit it, so you held my hand the whole time." "That was before." "Before what?" Eleanor found herself asking despite her better judgment. "Before I heard the whispers," Elizabeth said, her gaze drifting past Eleanor to some point beyond. "They started that summer, telling me that you were stealing my life, my breath, my thoughts, that you had to be stopped before you took everything." Eleanor felt a surge of pity mixed with her fear. "Those weren't real, Lizzie. You needed help, but none of us realized it." Elizabeth's focus snapped back to Eleanor, her expression hardening. Don't patronize me. I'm not crazy. I just see things more clearly than most people. She took another step forward. I've had a lot of time to think at Pinehurst about our games, about you, and I've realized something important. Eleanor backed up until she felt the cold porcelain of the sink against her back. What's that? I never got to finish our last game, Elizabeth said, reaching into her other pocket and producing a small vial filled with clear liquid, an exact replica of the one from that night at Lake Serenity. I think it's time we played Buried Secrets one more time, don't you? In that moment, something shifted within Eleanor. Years of therapy, of rebuilding, of reclaiming her power, crystallized into a clarity she hadn't felt before. She was no longer the frightened girl who had complied with her sister's twisted games out of fear and conditioning. No, she said, her voice steady. I'm not playing any more games with you, Elizabeth. Elizabeth's smile faltered. You don't have a choice. I've already decided. That's where you're wrong, Eleanor said, straightening her shoulders. I always had a choice. I was just too scared to make it before. Not anymore. With deliberate calm, Eleanor reached into her purse and withdrew her cell phone, a precaution Michael had insisted upon when they learned of Elizabeth's escape. I'm going to call for help now. You can stay and face the consequences, or you can run. But either way, this ends today. Elizabeth's expression contorted with rage. You ungrateful little. She lunged forward, the vial raised like a weapon. Eleanor, anticipating the move, sidestepped and pressed the panic button on her phone. A direct line to campus security. The bathroom door shuttered as someone on the outside tried the handle, then began pounding. Eleanor, you in there? The police are on their way. Michael's voice called through the door. Elizabeth froze, her gaze darting between Eleanor and the door. For a moment, Eleanor saw something like fear in her twin's eyes. Perhaps the first time Elizabeth had ever experienced the emotion she had so relished causing in others. They'll catch you, Lizzie. Eleanor said softly. Maybe not today, but eventually, and you'll go back to Pinehurst, or somewhere worse. Is that what you want? Elizabeth's hand trembled, the vial catching the fluorescent light. You think you've won, don't you? That you're so strong now, so healed. Her voice dripped with contempt. But you'll never be free of me, Ellie. Never. I'm part of you, just like you're part of me. That's the real game. The one that never ends. The pounding on the door intensified, and the sound of splintering wood suggested it wouldn't hold much longer. Elizabeth glanced at the bathroom window. Small, but perhaps large enough for someone of her slight build to squeeze through. This isn't over, she hissed, backing toward the window. Remember what I told you. Games can be replayed. As the bathroom door finally gave way, Elizabeth smashed the vial on the floor and clambered onto the sink, pushing the window open and disappearing through it just as Michael and a security guard burst into the room. The police searched the area, but found no trace of Elizabeth. She had vanished once again, leaving nothing but the broken vial and the worn photograph on the bathroom floor. In the aftermath, Eleanor made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of running, instead of looking over her shoulder for the rest of her life, she chose to confront her fear head-on. With the support of Michael, her parents, and Dr. Chen, she went public with her story, giving interviews to local and then national media about her experience as a victim of sibling abuse. Her testimony led to a re-evaluation of how such cases were handled by mental health professionals and law enforcement. It also brought other survivors out of the shadows, people who had suffered similar torment at the hands of family members and had been disbelieved or dismissed. Elelena established a foundation, Twin Light, dedicated to supporting victims of sibling abuse and raising awareness about the issue. She completed a master's degree in clinical psychology and became a licensed therapist specializing in trauma recovery. She and Michael married in 2000, settling in a coastal town in Oregon, where they felt secure but not isolated. Elizabeth remained at large, a shadow at the edges of Eleanor's consciousness. There were occasional reported sightings in Seattle and Denver, once as far away as London, but nothing concrete. The FBI maintained an open file on her case, and Eleanor received periodic updates, though they offered little reassurance. In 2005, Eleanor published a memoir titled The Games We Played, chronicling her experiences and her journey toward healing. The book became a bestseller and was lauded for its unflinching examination of familial abuse and the complex psychology of twinship. It also served as a beacon for others navigating similar trauma, offering a roadmap to recovery that Elelena herself had lacked. During a book signing in Portland, a young woman approached Elelena's table with tears in her eyes. "Your story saved my life," she said, pushing up her sleeve to reveal a series of fading scars. "My brother, he was like your sister. No one believed me until I showed them your book." Such encounters affirmed Eleanor's decision to transform her suffering into something meaningful, something that could help others find their way out of darkness. Yet, even as she built this new life, a life of purpose and joy and love, she never fully escaped the vigilance her sister's threats had instilled in her. Every copper-haired woman glimpsed on a crowded street, every unexpected knock at the door, every phone call from an unknown number carried the potential for terror. Eleanor developed routines designed to minimize risk, varying her schedule, checking her surroundings, keeping her online presence carefully curated. Michael understood these precautions without judgment. "You do what you need to do to feel safe," he would say. "I'm here." In 2010, their daughter Lily was born, bringing a new dimension to Eleanor's healing process. As she held her newborn, studying the delicate features that somehow combined her own and Michael's in a perfect alchemy, Eleanor felt a fierce protectiveness unlike anything she had experienced before. "I will never let anyone hurt you," she whispered to the sleeping infant. Not ever. Motherhood brought both joy and new anxieties. Elelena found herself analyzing Lily's every interaction with other children, hypervigilant for any sign of the cruelty that had manifested so early in Elizabeth. But Lily grew into a kind, empathetic child with none of the coldness that had characterized her aunt. On Lily's FTH birthday, a package arrived at their home with no return address. Inside was a handmade doll with copper yarn for hair and button eyes the color of amber. Attached was a note in familiar handwriting from my niece on her birthday. "May she grow up with her mother's strength." The police were called. Security was increased, but once again, Elizabeth had vanished without a trace. The doll was confiscated for evidence, though no useful forensic information was recovered from it. This reminder of Elizabeth's continued presence in their lives shook Elelena deeply. For weeks afterward, she barely slept, keeping vigil by Lily's bedroom door. Her therapy practice suffered as she cancelled appointments, unable to focus on her clients' needs while her own sense of safety had been so profoundly disrupted. It was during this period of renewed fear that Eleanor made a decision she had been avoiding for years. She contacted Detective Marcus Rivera, who had been assigned to Elizabeth's case since her escape from Pinehurst. "I can't keep living like this," Eleanor told him during their meeting at the local police station. "Always waiting, always wondering when she'll reappear. I need to find her first." Detective Rivera looked skeptical. "That's not advisable, Ms. Blackwood. Your sister is dangerous, unpredictable, and no one knows her better than I do," Eleanor interrupted. "I've spent my entire adult life trying to understand her, to make sense of what happened between us. If anyone can anticipate her next move, it's me." After much discussion and against the advice of both the detective and Michael, Eleanor began what she called her countergame, a methodical attempt to locate Elizabeth using the intimate knowledge only a twin would possess. She revisited places from their childhood: the creek behind their old house in Ravenwood, the hollow tree where Elizabeth had hidden their mother's locket, the cabin at Lake Serenity, which had since been sold to new owners. At each location, Eleanor left a message only Elizabeth would understand, a reference to one of their games, but recontextualized as a challenge rather than a submission. "I'm not hiding anymore," these messages said in essence. "Find me if you dare." Months passed with no response, and Eleanor began to wonder if her strategy had failed. Perhaps Elizabeth had moved on, found new victims to torment, forgotten the twin she had once been so obsessed with controlling. Then on a crisp autumn day in 2015, exactly 40 years since their birth, Eleanor received a text message from an unknown number. "The final game begins where the first one ended. Come alone or forfeit." Eleanor knew immediately where she needed to go. The first game, Whispers in the Dark, had ended with the revelation of the hidden locket in the hollow tree by the creek in Ravenwood. Despite Michael's protests and Detective Rivera's insistence that they set up a sting operation, Eleanor was determined to face her sister on her own terms. "This has always been between Elizabeth and me," she told them. "It has to end the same way." With a promise to keep her phone on and a GPS tracker in her pocket as a concession to their concerns, Eleanor flew back to Ravenwood for the first time in nearly 20 years. The town had changed. New developments had replaced some of the familiar landmarks, and the main street boasted coffee shops and boutiques that hadn't existed in her youth. But as she drove her rental car down the winding road to the creek, Eleanor felt a sense of déjà vu so powerful it was almost dizzying. The path through the woods was overgrown, but still visible, a testament to generations of local children who had played among these trees. Eleanor followed it with the certainty of muscle memory, her heart pounding as she approached the ancient oak with the hollow space in its trunk. The hiding place Elizabeth had used all those years ago. As she neared the tree, Eleanor saw a figure sitting on a fallen log nearby, copper hair now streaked with silver, amber eyes watching her approach with an unreadable expression. "Hello, Ellie," Elizabeth said, rising to her feet. She looked older, of course, they both did. But there was something else different about her. A stillness, a hollowness that hadn't been there before. "You came." Eleanor stopped a safe distance away. "I told you I'm not hiding anymore." Elizabeth smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. Always so brave now. So different from the scared little girl who would do anything I asked. She gestured to the hollow tree. "Do you remember Mom's locket?" Eleanor said. "You stole it and hid it here. Then you punished me for keeping your secret." "I tested you," Elizabeth corrected. "And you failed just like you failed all my other tests." Eleanor shook her head. "That's not what they were, Lizzie. They weren't tests or games. They were torture. You Hurt me because it made you feel powerful. Elizabeth's expression flickered. Something like doubt crossing her features before hardening again into certainty. I did what was necessary. You were weak. You needed to be stronger. No, Eleanor said firmly. I was a child. We both were. And you were ill. You still are. You need help, Elizabeth. Elizabeth laughed, a brittle sound that echoed through the trees. Help? Like what they gave me at Pinehurst. Drugs that turned my mind to fog. Therapists who treated me like a lab specimen. She took a step closer. No one understood. Not them. Not our parents. Not even you. Especially not you. Then help me understand. Now, Eleanor said, holding her ground. Tell me why. Why did you do those things to me? What did I ever do to deserve that kind of cruelty? For a moment, Elizabeth looked genuinely confused by the question. You existed, she said finally, as if it were the most obvious answer in the world. You took up space that should have been mine. You breathed air that should have filled my lungs alone. Don't you see? There was never supposed to be two of us. The simplicity of the explanation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. All these years, all the analysis and therapy and attempts to understand the psychology behind her sister's actions, and it came down to this primal resentment of her very existence. I didn't choose to be born as your twin, Lizzie, Eleanor said softly. Just like you didn't choose to be born with whatever it is inside you that makes you unable to feel empathy or remorse. We were both victims of circumstance. Elizabeth's face contorted with anger. Don't you dare pity me. I'm not some broken thing to be fixed or pied. I see the world clearly, more clearly than any of you. I always have. And what do you see now? Eleanor asked. What is it you want from me after all this time? Elizabeth reached into her pocket and withdrew something small and silver. Their mother's locket tarnished with age, but instantly recognizable. I want to finish our game. The real game. The one that's been playing out between us since the womb. She held out the locket, letting it dangle from its chain. Take it. Open it. Eleanor hesitated, every instinct warning her of danger, but she had come too far to turn back now. Slowly, she approached and took the locket from her sister's hand, careful not to touch Elizabeth's skin. With trembling fingers, she pried open the small silver heart. Inside, where there had once been a photograph of their grandmother, was a tiny key. What is this? Eleanor asked, looking up to find Elizabeth watching her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. The key to the cabin, Elizabeth said. Lake Serenity. I own it now under a different name. That's where we'll finish what we started that night. In 1989. Eleanor closed the locket, the key inside it suddenly feeling like a burning coal in her palm. No, I'm not going back there with you. I'm not playing any more of your games. But you must, Elizabeth insisted, her voice taking on a pleading quality that Eleanor had never heard before. You don't understand. I'm dying, Ellie. The words hung in the air between them, unexpected and jarring. Eleanor studied her sister's face, noticing for the first time the unnatural pore beneath her skin. The way her clothes hung loosely on her frame, the slight tremor in her hands. What do you mean? Eleanor asked, caution wearing with concern. Brain tumor, inoperable. 6 months, maybe less. Elizabeth's smile was bitter. Ironic, isn't it? All those years of planning the perfect way to destroy you. And in the end, it's my own body that betrays me. Eleanor felt a complex wave of emotions. Shock, disbelief, and somewhere beneath those, a confusing mixture of grief and relief. "I'm sorry," she said, surprising herself with the sincerity of the words. Elizabeth waved away the sympathy. "I don't want your pity. I want your company one last time at the cabin where everything changed. Just you and me. Finishing what we started." "Why should I trust you?" Eleanor asked. "How do I know this isn't just another manipulation?" Elizabeth reached into her other pocket and produced a folded document which she handed to Eleanor. It was a medical report from a hospital in Seattle detailing the diagnosis of a glioblastoma multiforme, an aggressive and terminal brain cancer. "I could have forged this," Elizabeth admitted as Eleanor read the report, "but I didn't. Check with the hospital if you don't believe me." Eleanor folded the paper and handed it back. "Even if I believe you're dying, why would I agree to meet you at the cabin? After everything you've done, because you have questions that only I can answer," Elizabeth said. "Because despite everything, I'm still your twin. And because I'm offering you something you've wanted since you were 13 years old." "What's that?" "Closure," Elizabeth said simply. "A chance to end this on your terms, not mine." Eleanor considered her sister's words. She thought of Michael and Lily waiting at home, of the life she had built from the ashes of her childhood. She thought of the thousands of survivors who looked to her as an example of healing and strength. And she thought of the scared girl she had once been, buried alive in the woods behind that cabin, fighting her way out of the darkness. "If I agree to this, there are conditions," Eleanor said. "Finally, Detective Rivera knows where I am. I've sent him the coordinates of the cabin. If I don't check in every hour, you'll come looking for me with a full tactical team." This was a bluff. She had disabled the GPS tracker before entering the woods, not wanting to risk Elizabeth's detection. But her sister didn't need to know that. Elizabeth smiled, a hint of her old smugness returning. "Always so cautious now." "Fine. Agreed. What else?" "No drugs. No restraints, no games." Eleanor continued. "We talk like adults. And when I decide it's over, I leave. No arguments, no attempts to stop me." Elizabeth considered for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed. Meet me there tomorrow. At sunset. Come alone, just as I will." As Elizabeth turned to leave, Eleanor called after her. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" Elizabeth paused, looking back over her shoulder. "You don't? That's what makes it interesting, doesn't it? One last leap of faith, Ellie. For old time's sake." After Elizabeth disappeared into the woods, Eleanor stood by the hollow tree for a long time, the locket heavy in her hand. The key inside it representing both a terrible risk and a potential release from the shadow that had hung over her life for so long. That evening, she called Michael from her hotel room in Ravenwood, explaining Elizabeth's proposal and her own conflicted feelings about it. "It's too dangerous," Michael insisted, his voice tight with fear. "She's manipulated you before. What if this is just another one of her games? What if it isn't?" Eleanor countered. "What if she really is dying and this is my only chance to understand why she did what she did? To finally put this to rest?" They argued late into the night, but in the end, Michael knew he couldn't stop her. "At least let me come with you," he pleaded. "I'll stay out of sight, just close enough to help if things go wrong." Eleanor considered the offer, tempted by the security it would provide. But something told her this final confrontation needed to happen as Elizabeth had requested. Just the two of them facing each other without interference or audience. "I need to do this alone," she said finally. "But I promise I'll be careful. I'll check in every hour. And if you don't hear from me, you call Detective Rivera immediately." The following day, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Eleanor drove the winding road to Lake Serenity. The cabin looked different than she remembered. It had been renovated. The weathered logs stained a darker shade, the windows replaced with larger panes that reflected the golden light of sunset. Yet the feeling of isolation, of being cut off from the world, remained the same. Elizabeth's car, a nondescript sedan with rental plates, was already parked in the gravel driveway. Eleanor pulled up beside it and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. Then she took the locket from her pocket, removed the tiny key, and approached the cabin's front door. The key turned smoothly in the lock. As Eleanor pushed the door open, she was struck by how different the interior looked from her memories. Gone was the rustic, somewhat shabby decor of their childhood vacation. In its place was a sleek, minimalist design, leather furniture, glass tables, abstract art on the walls. The only familiar element was the stone fireplace where a fire now crackled, casting dancing shadows across the room. Elizabeth stood by the large windows overlooking the lake, a glass of red wine in her hand. She had changed into a simple black dress that accentuated her thinness, her copper hair pulled back in a severe style that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. "Right on time," she said, turning to face Eleanor. "Would you like a glass? It's a decent Pinot Noir." Eleanor shook her head. "I'd prefer to keep a clear head." Elizabeth shrugged. "Still don't trust me. Wise, I suppose." She gestured to one of the leather armchairs. "Sit. We have much to discuss." Eleanor remained standing. "I want to know why you brought me here. What closure could possibly come from returning to the place where you buried me alive?" Elizabeth's expression softened slightly. "That night changed everything, didn't it? For both of us. It was the first time you fought back. Really fought back. I respected that even if I didn't show it. You respected me for not dying when you tried to kill me." Eleanor's voice rose with incredulity. "I wasn't trying to kill you," Elizabeth said, seeming genuinely surprised by the accusation. "If I had wanted you dead, you would have been. No, I was testing your will to survive. And you passed magnificently." Eleanor felt a familiar mixture of confusion and anger rising within her. That's not how normal people treat someone they care about. "Elizabeth." "I've never claimed to be normal," Elizabeth replied, taking a sip of her wine. "But I did care about you in my way. I still do. That's why I've been watching over you all these years." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. "What do you mean watching over me?" Elizabeth smiled. "Did you think those occasional sightings were accidents? That doll I sent for Lily's birthday? I've always been closer than you realized. Not to harm you, but to ensure your continued strength." The revelation was both disturbing and in a twisted way consistent with Elizabeth's warped perspective. She had never seen her actions as torture, but as some perverse form of training or testing. "Is that why you're dying now?" Eleanor asked, a sudden suspicion forming. "Did you do something to yourself to make this happen?" Elizabeth laughed, though the sound held no humor. "Always so dramatic. No, I didn't give myself cancer. But I did refuse treatment beyond palliative care. What would be the point of extending a life that's already served its purpose? And what purpose was that? Elelena found herself genuinely curious about how her sister viewed her own existence. Elizabeth set down her wine glass and approached Elelena. Slowly, stopping just out of arm's reach. To make you stronger, to forge you in fire until you became unbreakable. She gestured around them. Look at what you've accomplished. Best-selling author, respected therapist, founder of a national organization, loving wife and mother. Would any of that have happened if I hadn't pushed you to your limits? Elelena stared at her twin, momentarily speechless at the breathtaking narcissism of her perspective. Yes, she said finally, her voice firm. All of it would have happened and more if you had been a normal sister instead of a tormentor. I succeeded despite you, Elizabeth, not because of you. Something flickered in Elizabeth's eyes. A brief flash of doubt. Or perhaps pain. You can believe that if it comforts you, but we both know the truth. The world is cruel, Ellie. I just prepared you for it better than most. The world can be cruel, Elelena agreed. But it's also full of kindness and beauty and love, things you've never allowed yourself to experience or understand. Elizabeth turned away, moving back to the window. For a long moment, she stared out at the darkening lake, her silhouette outlined against the last rays of sunlight. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost wistful. I hear them less now, she said. Hear what? The whispers, the ones that started that summer when we were 10. They used to be so loud, so insistent, telling me what you were plotting, how you were stealing parts of me bit by bit. Elizabeth pressed her palm against the glass. The doctors at Pinehurst called it psychosis. Said it was a symptom of my condition, but I knew better. They were real as you and me. Eleanor felt a profound sadness wash over her. For the first time, she saw her sister not as a monster, but as a tragic figure, a mind imprisoned by its own broken chemistry, interpreting the world through a lens of paranoia and fear. I'm sorry, Lizzie, she said, taking a cautious step closer. I can't imagine what that must have been like for you. Elizabeth turned sharply, her expression hardening. I don't want your pity. It's not pity, Eleanor said calmly. It's empathy. Something I learned despite your best efforts to break me. Elizabeth seemed to deflate slightly, the anger draining from her posture. Well, it doesn't matter now, does it? Soon I'll be gone. And you'll be free of me completely. Is that why you brought me here? To tell me you're dying and to what? Justify what you did to me? Get some kind of forgiveness? Elizabeth moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. I don't believe in forgiveness. Not really. But I do believe in completion. In finishing what was started. She reached into the pocket of her dress and withdrew a small object, a silver lighter with an intricate engraving of two intertwined trees. Do you remember this? She asked, holding it up so the firelight caught the silver. Elelena recognized it immediately. Dad's lighter. The one he always carried but never used because he quit smoking when we were born. Elizabeth nodded. I took it from his study the day before we came to the cabin that summer. I was going to use it afterward to make sure there would be no evidence left, but then you escaped and I had to change plans. And you? Fear gripped Eleanor as she processed her sister's words. Evidence of what, Elizabeth? Instead of answering directly, Elizabeth flicked the lighter, the small flame dancing in the dimming room. I've spent my entire life feeling incomplete, Ellie, like half of a whole. The doctors have all sorts of fancy terms for it. Pathological jealousy, delusional disorder, identity disturbance. But it's simpler than that. I was never meant to share this world with you. She closed the lighter with a snap and returned it to her pocket. That's why I brought you here. Not for forgiveness, not for justification, but for an ending we both deserve. Eleanor's instinct screamed at her to run, but she held her ground. What kind of ending did you have in mind? Elizabeth smiled, a sad, almost gentle expression that Eleanor had never seen on her face before. The only one possible for twins like us. Tell me, do you still dream about that night? About the earth pressing down on you, the rain seeping into your shallow grave? Sometimes. Eleanor admitted, less often now. I dream about it, too, Elizabeth said. But in my dreams, I'm the one buried, and you're standing over me, watching as I struggle to breathe. She moved toward the hallway that led to the back of the cabin. Come, there's something I need to show you. Every rational thought told Eleanor to refuse, to leave immediately, but curiosity and something deeper, a need for resolution, propelled her forward. She followed Elizabeth down the hallway to a door at the end. The bedroom beyond was sparsely furnished, just a bed with plain white linens and a bedside table with a lamp and a small stack of books. Elizabeth crossed to a closet door and opened it, revealing not clothes, but a steep staircase leading down into darkness. After you, she said, gesturing for Eleanor to go first. I don't think so, Eleanor replied, crossing her arms. Whatever you want to show me, you can bring it up here. Elizabeth sighed, still so untrusting. Fine, she descended the stairs, leaving Eleanor alone in the bedroom. For a brief, wild moment, Eleanor considered fleeing, running to her car, and driving away as fast as possible. But she had come this far, and some stubborn part of her refused to leave without the answers she had sought for so long. Elizabeth returned, carrying a large leather-bound book. She set it on the bed and opened it, revealing not pages, but a hollowed-out space containing a handgun. What is this? Eleanor demanded, backing toward the door. Elizabeth said calmly, making no move to touch the weapon. In case you weren't willing to listen to what I have to say. And what is that? Exactly. Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking exhausted. I'm going to die, Ellie. Painfully. Degradingly, as this thing in my brain grows and takes away everything that makes me who I am. I'll lose my memory, my coordination, eventually even my ability to speak or recognize my own reflection. She looked up, meeting Eleanor's gaze. I don't want that end. Understanding dawned on Eleanor. You want me to help you die? Elizabeth nodded. Who better? The one person who has more right than anyone to decide when my life should end. The request was so unexpected, so contrary to everything Eleanor had anticipated that she found herself momentarily speechless. When she finally found her voice, it was steady. Uncertain. No, absolutely not. Elizabeth's expression hardened. I thought you might say that. That's why I brought insurance. She reached for the gun. Eleanor tensed, prepared to run. But Elizabeth simply removed the weapon from its hiding place and held it out. Gripped first. Take it, she said. Check. If you want. It's loaded. One bullet. Cautiously, Eleanor accepted the gun, keeping it pointed at the floor. It was heavier than she had expected, the metal cold against her palm. I don't Understand, she said. It's simple, Elizabeth explained. I'm giving you a choice. You can use that to end my suffering quickly, mercifully, or you can walk away and leave me to face a slow, agonizing death alone. Either way, you'll be free of me. Eleanor stared at the weapon in her hand, then at her sister, her mirror image distorted by time and illness, and the fundamental differences in their souls. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine doing what Elizabeth asked, pulling the trigger, watching her tormentor fall, walking away, knowing that the shadow that had hung over her life was truly gone forever. But that wasn't who Eleanor was. It wasn't who she had fought to become, despite everything Elizabeth had done to her. No, she said again, placing the gun carefully on the bedside table out of Elizabeth's immediate reach. I won't kill you, Lizzie. Not because you don't deserve judgment for what you did to me, but because I deserve peace. Real peace. Not the kind that comes from more violence. Elizabeth's face contorted with anger. Then what was the point of coming here of all this? She gestured wildly around them. I offered you closure, a chance to end this on your terms. These aren't my terms, Eleanor said quietly. They are yours. You're still trying to control me, to force me into playing your game, but I'm not that frightened girl anymore. She moved toward the bedroom door, then paused, turning back to her sister. I forgive you, Elizabeth, not because you've earned it or because what you did was forgivable. I forgive you because carrying this hatred and fear has been a burden I refuse to bear any longer. And I hope that in whatever time you have left, you find some measure of peace yourself. Elizabeth's laugh was sharp, brittle. Peace? There's no peace. For people like me, Ellie. There never was. Perhaps not, Eleanor conceded. But that's not my responsibility anymore. It never really was. As she turned to leave, Elizabeth called after her, her voice suddenly small, almost childlike. Will you stay? Just until I fall asleep. Like when we were little and there was a thunderstorm. Eleanor hesitated, torn between compassion and self-preservation. Finally, she nodded. I'll stay, but just for a little while. She sat in a chair by the window while Elizabeth took her medication, a combination of painkillers and sedatives that her hospice nurse had prescribed. As the drugs took effect, Elizabeth's eyelids grew heavy, her breathing slowed. You were always the better one, she murmured, her words slurring slightly. The stronger one. I just couldn't admit it. Eleanor said nothing, watching as her sister drifted into sleep. When she was certain Elizabeth wouldn't wake, she rose quietly and left the room, closing the door behind her. In the main room of the cabin, Eleanor called Michael as promised, assuring him she was safe and would be home the following day. Then, she settled on the couch, keeping vigil through the night, listening to the occasional sounds of Elizabeth's restless sleep from the bedroom. At dawn, Eleanor checked on her sister one last time. Elizabeth was still sleeping, her face relaxed in a way Eleanor had rarely seen it. On the bedside table, Eleanor left a note with her phone number and a simple message. When it gets too hard, call me. You don't have to face this alone. Then she walked out of the cabin into the crisp morning air, feeling lighter than she had in decades. The sun was rising over Lake Serenity, turning the water into a sheet of gold. Eleanor stood on the shore for a long moment, breathing deeply, letting the beauty of the moment wash over her. She never saw Elizabeth again. 3 months later, she received a call from a hospice nurse in Seattle informing her that her sister had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Among Elizabeth's few possessions was an envelope addressed to Eleanor. Inside was their mother's silver locket and a note with just 2 words, "Game over." Eleanor wore the locket to the small private funeral she arranged. As she stood beside the grave, Michael's steady presence at her side, she thought about the long twisted journey that had brought her to this moment. About the girl she had been, the woman she had become, and the twin who had been both her tormentor, and in a strange way, her catalyst for growth. The bond between twins is unlike any other, even when that bond is forged in fear and pain rather than love. For Eleanor Blackwood, that bond had shaped her life in ways both terrible and transformative. Now, as she placed a single white rose on her sister's casket, she felt the last of its weight lifting from her shoulders. Elizabeth had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps she had been right about one. Their game was finally truly over.